Welcome to My Point of View. I am your fat and opinionated host, also known as Cinema Shogun. Now, yesterday, the Gonsalves family lawyer revealed that Bryan Kohberger has no connection to the Idaho 4, meaning that the Idaho 4 didn't even know that Bryan Kohberger existed, which is kind of scary and it's kind of weird, but I made this point over on my main channel, Cinema Shogun. I made the point that just because the Idaho 4 didn't know Bryan doesn't mean that Bryan didn't know the Idaho 4. Now, I've been battling back and forth with myself, trying to figure out where I really stand on this situation, because when you look at the evidence, when you look at all the information out there, it's like one half of me believes that this was a random attack, if you will. Meaning that Bryan didn't necessarily know the people who he was attacking, although we know he knew where he was going to do this because he was stalking their house for a while. And then the other half of me feels like there must be some type of connection there, even if it's a connection that you necessarily can't find on paper. Maybe one of the Idaho 4 served Bryan Kohberger at work. Maybe they shot him a birdie while driving by in traffic. You know, there's little connections that you have with human beings in life that may not mean something to you, that may mean the world to the other individual. So there's a big possibility that the Idaho 4 had no idea that they ever ran into Bryan, but Bryan maybe remembers and, you know, holds that closely to his heart. But, you know, after we found out that Bryan's phone was pinged outside of their house 12 times, after we found out that Bryan was watching them as far back as June, July, and August, I think it made a lot of people feel like there must be some type of connection here. There must be something. Well, I mean, in my opinion, I understand why people feel that way, but for me, I always thought that for Bryan, it was more about the crime or more about the act as opposed to who he was carrying out the act against. Now, like I just said, his phone was pinged outside of their home at least a dozen times that we know of so far. There's a lot more information and a lot more evidence that we don't know about yet. Law enforcement doesn't have to put out everything. They don't have to show you their hand yet. They put out enough information to make the arrest, and then the rest will come out in court. But everyone's thinking, you know, oh, Bryan's probably sitting in his car, casing the house. We know that the phone would be pinged late at night, you know, early in the morning, really early in the morning, while people should be asleep. Well, it has now been revealed that Bryan Kohberger was so close to this home that his phone picked up on the Wi-Fi. Investigators were able to find out that Bryan's phone connected with the home's Wi-Fi. And I don't mean during the actual attack, because we know that Bryan had his phone off during that time. I mean throughout the duration of him watching this house, he was close enough to pick up on the Wi-Fi. Now, I don't know how strong their Wi-Fi signal is, but I would assume that means Bryan is pretty close. Now, when you look at the house from the street, when you look at the house from the front, there's not much to see there. But if Bryan were to have positioned himself somewhere behind this house, because I don't want to say it's a wooded area, but there's some trees, and the way the back of this house is set up, you could see straight through the glass sliding door. You could see, you know, the balcony. There's a lot of windows there, and I wonder how closely Bryan watched these four individuals. I can't help but wonder how closely, what did he see? And I feel like because we've gotten some good shots from photographers that work for the various media outlets showing the back of the home, and I feel like some of those photos are probably almost aligned with the exact angle that Bryan probably used to watch this house. So the whole back, even though the whole front of the house, like there's nothing much to see there, the back of the house can reveal a lot. And if Bryan was watching them for months, how closely was he watching them? Was he watching them to figure out their routines? Was he watching to see how the house was laid out inside? Maybe Bryan had gone to a party at this house before and already knew the layout. I don't know, but I really want to figure out why Bryan specifically chose this house. If it's true that there's no connection between him and the Idaho 4, then why these 4 students? Why this home? There has to be a reason there. And I think one of the reasons may be just because of how easy it was for Bryan to observe these people within this home. I mean, I know young people don't think about things the way old people think, so I can guarantee you, half the time their blinds, their curtains, or whatever are open. Also, it's like a perfect area. You know, you want to get sun in the house, you leave the blinds or the curtains open, which would expose a lot of your life to a stalker if they're sitting out in your tree. And now we know that Kohberger was sitting out in tree branches and stuff. I'm exaggerating, but we don't know. For all we know, Bryan is like a cuckoo bird up in a nest with binoculars looking inside of this home. But at the very least, Bryan's phone and Bryan were close enough to this house to pick up on the Wi-Fi. Now, does that mean that Bryan was just watching them very closely? Or I wonder if there were times where Bryan went to that home to go ahead and carry out this act, but then chickened out, or then something happened to make him change his mind. I think there's a big possibility that when Bryan's phone connected with this home's Wi-Fi, he could have been right outside the house planning on going in. We don't know. But I do think that if Bryan watched them all the way from summertime until November, then I can't help but feel like maybe there were times where Bryan thought, this is the day. This is the night that I'm going to do this. And then maybe he gets close to the home and something happens that spooks him away. You understand what I'm saying? But I really wonder why that day. Because we know Bryan was watching them for months. So why on that day in November? Why that specific day? I think there's probably a reason behind that as well. And I wonder, while Bryan was casing this house, in Bryan's mind, was it just going to be any day that he saw the opportunity? Did he sit out there for months waiting on the perfect opportunity? Knowing that, hey, tonight can be the night, or tomorrow night could be the night. Yesterday could have been the day. You know, those are questions that I really want answered. I'm not sure if we'll get the answers to them, but at the very least, we now know how closely Bryan was watching them, and that's really scary. For him to be that close to the house that his phone is picking up on the Wi-Fi. You know, so, I mean, who knows if one of the Idaho 4 may have even seen him, you know, behind the home or watching them. You know, those are questions that we may never get answered. But let me know your thoughts about all of this down in the comments below. Does this freak you out? Does this creep you out? Why do you think Bryan was so close to the home? Let me know all of your opinions down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and remember, always remain opinionated.